Hello, I'm New Hampshire State Representative Jeanine, and you're watching Chattin' with Jeanine Zoom edition. We're still following the U.S. Marines in the Pacific during World War II, and this week historian Lee Rash will chat with us about Pappy, Boyington. But which of the 30,000 islands in the Pacific Ocean, that part of the world known as Oceania, will we visit this week? I don't know, but we can ask him. Welcome, Lee. Thanks for coming back to my show.
Well, thank you for having me.
Anytime. This is awesome. So I know we're going to continue on through the end of July with a break in between because I have a candidate I've got to sneak in here. And then we're going to do one more after that on the CAP Marines. CAP Marines, we looked it up.
Oh, very good.
So yes, definitely want to do that show too. So I know we ended last week with a homework assignment. You wanted me to some song. I don't know what you called it, but I did look it up, and when they started saying we are lambs who lost our way, then I knew it. It was the Baba Black Sheep song. So Where are we going? Where are we going this week?
Well, we're basically going back to where we were last week. So let me share the screen and we'll take a look. Here's the guy we're going to be talking about, Gregory Boyington, better known as Pappy Boyington. So he's born in 1912 and he passed away in 1988. Okay, there we go. He's actually from Washington State, and he attended Washington University as a Husky. He was on the wrestling team, and he also was involved in Army ROTC. So I guess originally he thought he was going to be an Army officer. Graduated in 1934 from University of Washington with a Bachelor of Science degree in Aeronautical Engineering. And he worked as a draftsman. Let's see, maybe I should move you over there. He worked as a draftsman for Boeing in Seattle, but he really wanted to be a pilot.
I like how the plane went by as you said that.
That was a Boeing plane also.
Ah.
Okay. So the U.S. government had a program where young men could sign up to become aviation cadets. And so in 1935, he signed up for the program, but they rejected him because he was married. Ooh. And they didn't take married men. Well, he found something out very interesting about himself that he hadn't known before either. He actually grew up with this name, Gregory Hallenbeck. And he assumed all his life that his stepfather was his real father. But when he applied for this program, he found out that he actually had a father named Charles Boyington, and that his mother and Charles had been divorced when he was an infant. So he decided, gee, there's no Gregory Boyington with a record of being married. So he went and applied for the program under the Marine Corps as Gregory Boyington, and they accepted him.
Oh, good for him.
He was commissioned as a second lieutenant in the Marine Corps in 1937. Here is his cherished, what we call butter bar. Second lieutenants wear a gold bar, one gold bar. And as a Marine, he learned how to fly off of aircraft carriers, off of the Lexington and the Yorktown. And by November the 4th, 1940, he's promoted to first lieutenant, the coveted silver bar here. Shortly after that, he found out about an opportunity to get paid an awful lot of money for flying airplanes. He volunteered for a company called the Central Aircraft Manufacturing Company. And what this actually was a civilian firm that was contracting to staff a special air unit that was going to fly airplanes, fighter planes, for China around the Burma Road to protect the Chinese army and Chinese installations against the Japanese. Now, the Chinese had been at war with the Japanese openly since 1937, but even before that, since 1931. So, you know, when people ask, when did World War II start? A lot of people will say, well, September 1st, 1939. But actually, the war was already going on. If you go to Asia, it's really started in 1931 with the Japanese.
That's a cool plane.
This is a type of plane that Boyington is going to fly in China. Okay. And that group will become known as the American Volunteer Group, the AVG, but better known as the Flying Tigers.
I've heard of the Flying Tigers.
Okay. Here is the patch they wore on the uniforms that the Chinese Army gave them. The guy that was the leader of the AVG, well, let me tell you about the plane first. The plane that you saw in that previous slide is a P-40 Warhawk made by the Wright Curtis company. Here is all the schematics on it. Single engine, single seat, so only one person in here. All metal flyer, and this is a ground attack airplane. It's got a maximum speed of 360 miles an hour, had a 12-cylinder V12 Allison engine. So here you can see the engine. And that's why the nose sticks out so far. This is kind of like the engine in your car that goes straight forward. Other airplanes might use a radial engine, and I'll show you an example of that in a minute. This propeller is 11 inches long from the center out. Okay, here is their chief nemesis, the Japanese Zero. Then the American Army Air Corps will codename this Zeke. I don't know why nobody called it a Zeke. Everybody called it a Zero. But it actually gets its name. It's called the Mitsubishi A6M fighter, and the Japanese Navy called it the Type 0 carrier fighter. So that's why it got that famous name of the Zero. It's got a top speed.
Going back to propellers, did you say 11 inches? Did you mean 11 feet?
Nope, 11 really? Inches.
11 inches.
I'm sorry. I did say inches. You're right.
Okay. Just want to make sure.
Bigger than 11 feet. It's 11 feet. Okay.
11 feet.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
We'll give you an extra point for that.
Yay.
Okay, now 11 feet, and that is going to be significant when I show you another airplane because the propeller makes a difference. Now, in this Japanese Zero, 350 miles an hour, but this was the most maneuverable airplane of its time. And the Japanese were able to achieve that maneuverability by sacrificing any kind of armor, protective armor on it. So that's why they could move around so fast. But it also made it vulnerable in combat.
Is that what a kamikaze would fly?
No.
Okay.
Kamikazes would fly. That's a whole other story.
Okay, but, we won't go there. We'll save it for another week.
They even had some special airplanes for them that were nothing more than flying bombs. Yeah, and we don't actually see kamikazes until 1944. So I could cover that later. But here we got two 20-millimeter cannons on the Zero. Okay. And fully loaded, the Zero weighed a little over 5,000 pounds. So it's kind of significant too when you're going to compare it to some other airplanes. Here is the guy that commanded the AVG. This is Claire Chenault, another American who had resigned from the American military. He'd been an Army Air Corps officer, and he resigned in order to go over and command this AVG unit. All of the pilots in the AVG are Americans, but none of them were associated with the American military. They all had to resign their commissions because America was neutral in the war against Japan and China. So there's kind of some special maneuverings in order for these guys to fly for the Flying Tigers. After the United States does get into the war, in 1942, the Flying Tigers were basically absorbed into the Army Air Forces of the United States in 1942. So they ceased to exist. I've got to move you back down here. Boyington, he had 6 victories as a Tiger. And in April of 1942, before the Tigers were basically disbanded, Boyington resigned from the Tigers. He comes back to the United States and he rejoins the Marine Corps, this time as a major. Here's his gold oak leaf as a major. And eventually he's going to become the commanding officer of the VMA 214. That's a Marine Corps Fighter Squadron 214. Here's their badge right here. You can see that familiar.
I like it. We're bad.
Right there. Now, VMA, what does that stand for? Now, when I was in the Marine Corps, I always thought, as most of my fellow Marines thought, that the V stands for vertical Marine Force, but no, actually not. The V denotes that this was a heavier than air aircraft. Back in the early days of Marine aviation, the Marines had 2 letter designations for aircraft. A V meant it was heavier than air, and a Z meant that it was a dirigible, a blimp. Now, we don't have blimps anymore, but the Marine Corps still uses that V, and now the V means a fixed wing aircraft. So if you have a Marine unit that uses helicopters, they're going to use an H rather than a V. All right, here is a picture of one of the units at Guadalcanal. After Guadalcanal the airfield is taken, August 20th, General Vandegrift says, okay, we're open for business, bring on the planes. These happen to be Grumman F-4F carrier-based planes. They're the first ones. And the code name for Guadalcanal in the military was Cactus. So the Air Force there referred to themselves as the Cactus Air Force. The flight airfield itself was referred to as Henderson Field. And this was named after a Marine who was shot down during the Battle of Midway. His name was Lofton Henderson. Earned the Navy Cross there.
I've never heard the name Lofton before.
Lofton?
Yeah, you just don't meet any Loftons these days.
Yeah, there's a lot more Rashes.
Yeah.
Okay. Gregory Boyington was referred to by his fellow Marines that he commanded as Gramps, because he was 31 years old and he was 10 years older than most of them. Well, one of the lieutenants under him, Paul Moon Mullen, did a parody on the Whiffenproof song. That's the song that I asked you to research. We are poor little lambs. And so he changed the lyrics, and in it, he used the word Pappy rather than Gramps. And so that's where we get that Pappy Boyington from.
And there's the Black Sheep.
Okay. Yeah. War correspondents picked up on this right away. And so he becomes famous in the newspapers as Pappy Boyington, the leader of VMF 214.
And there's even the link.
Yeah.
You can find the
And
song.
from there, they evolve into their squadron being called the Black Sheep Squadron. Okay. Now, Boyington is most well known for flying the Vought F4U Corsair. Here is a F4U Corsair. Excellent plane in the air, very maneuverable, very strong. It was originally designed to be a carrier-based aircraft, and so the Navy ordered hundreds of them. But they found out that this was not ideal for an aircraft carrier-based plane. And that's because of some design issues. One of them being the propeller.
Yeah, it looks weird.
Well, 13 feet, 4 inches long, which would be okay, except that the wings are way down at the bottom of the fuselage. And even when you put the landing wheels down, the propeller was too big. It would hit the deck.
Oh,
so
that's not good.
They changed the design on the wings. You see this gull-shaped wing?
Yeah.
In order to push the plane up and keep the propeller from hitting the deck. Well, when you do that, guess what happens to the pilot's visibility? He can't see in front of him anymore when he's on the ground. So if you ever see an F4U taxiing in an airport, which I've seen at Chino Plains of Flame Museum,
California,
far from where I live, you see the pilots doing this. Constantly turning so they can look out the side like a horse looks out the side of his head.
Okay.
Well, the Navy decided, okay, well, we'll just give these airplanes to the Marines. The Marines always get the Navy leftovers. Turned out to be a great deal for the Marines, who were land-based, and this was an excellent plane. Here is a picture of an F4U in the air.
That one's pretty.
2,000 horsepower, 18-cylinder radial engine. So instead of that long engine like you had on the P-40, this one is a radial engine, so it's more compact. All of the cylinders push out from the center. That's how they can get that closer to the fuselage. And this has a top speed of 440 miles an hour. You saw the top speed on the Zero, 350 miles an hour. The Zero is very maneuverable, can turn on a dime very quickly, still can outmaneuver an F4U, but the F4U is much faster. We're going to go back to Bougainville. I took you there last week. Now, a lot of the aircraft that are based on Guadalcanal are constantly coming up the Solomons and doing combat with the Japanese who are based at Rabaul in New Britain. And so in operations at Bougainville, after he's had many victories, Boyington is going to shoot down 14 enemy fighters in 32 days. Tremendous. Here's a Zero coming in here.
How does that compare to the Red Baron?
Well, the Red Baron shot down 80. But the American ace of World War I, Eddie Rickenbacker, shot down 26. And now we've got Pappy Boyington, who is getting close to Eddie Rickenbacker's record. On October the 17th, 1943, the squadron is going to meet Japanese forces again, along with some other squadrons from Guadalcanal, a force of 60 Japanese planes near Bougainville. And the squadron will shoot down 20 enemy planes on that day. The Black Sheep will return to Guadalcanal with absolutely no casualties. So big win for the Americans.
Good job.
during the 1943 World Series, which was in October of 1943, we've got the Yankees and the Cardinals playing. I'm a big baseball fan too, in case you don't know.
Oh yeah, the whole family is.
Yeah. But the squadron sent a message through the war correspondents: we'll shoot down one enemy plane for every baseball cap that the Yankees and the Cardinals send us. So here's the Yankees and the Cardinals. Here's their caps from 1943. They sent them 20 caps, and the squadron would shoot down more than that during the time frame of the World Series.
Wow, I wonder if any of those caps survive today if they're in a museum. That's an interesting piece of trivia.
Yeah, I'm sure they do. You're not too far from Cooperstown, right?
Where's Cooperstown?
Upstate New York. That's the Baseball Hall of Fame.
I could get there in a day.
Okay. Here's Eddie Rickenbacker right here, and he's got a record of 26 planes. And here would be the kind of plane that he would fly. This is the Sopwith Camel. So on January 3rd, 1944, we've got 48 American fighters doing combat near Rabaul. Again, 4 of these 48 American flyers are from the Black Sheep Squadron. One of them is Pappy Boyington. And Boyington will shoot down his 26th plane, thus tying the record with Eddie Rickenbacker. So everybody from the squadron knew about this 26th plane being shot down. Many of the other pilots observed that, confirming it. But nobody had seen or heard from Boyington after he shot down his 26th plane. What happened to him? Well, Boyington's wingman is going to be shot down, George Ashman, and killed. And Boyington himself is going to be declared missing in action.
Oh, never recovered.
What?
Oh.
Okay. Thank you, Justin.
So he was
okay.
There.
What happened to him? He bailed out, and he was picked up by a Japanese submarine.
Not given POW status.
Now, the Japanese did not give him POW status. That's correct. And so his captivity was not reported to the Red Cross. So it was unclear whether or not he was a prisoner of war or not. He's going to end up the next 20 months in a Japanese prison camp. And he will be interned, first of all, at a place called Ofuna, which is near Yokohama, where other high-profile prisoners who had not been declared POWs either were kept. Guys like Louis Zamperini. Mm-hmm. Okay. Now this is in violation of the Geneva Convention. The Japanese ran this prison, and they kept high-profile prisoners there, trying to extract some kind of benefit from these guys, getting statements. Zamperini was hounded to make statements on the radio. So never officially reported as a prisoner, and the Red Cross was not allowed access to these guys either. Eventually, they will be placed in a regular POW camp. Zamperini and Boyington both are going to end up in Omori camp, which is in Tokyo Bay. And he's going to be released from custody there, August 29th, 1945. And shortly after coming back to the United States, Boyington will be summoned to the White House. He had no idea what he was being called for, but he was going to be given the Medal of Honor. And here he is wearing the Medal of Honor. He wrote and published his own autobiography in 1958, calling it Baba Black Sheep. What else?
Yeah, I'm going to have to read that now.
He died of cancer in 1988, and he's buried at Arlington National Cemetery.
Oh, I didn't know to look for him.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing the screen, so we're open for questions if we have time, Justin.
Yeah, I think I have okay. Well, I have a couple of notes. I'm going to piggyback to last week where I told you about this book. This is it, the patents. So, and I have nails this week. Finally got some fingernails. So if you haven't read this book, I might loan it to you if you promise to send it back to me. We can talk about that offline. You know what? I went like this, and you normally in the studio that would make a noise, but I don't have anything hooked up. I don't have a mic because Justin, who's running the show, is 3 miles away from me.
Yeah, I loan out a lot of my books during the semester, and this year we had to go suddenly from regular classes to online, and I had all these books floating out there.
Yeah.
So I had to put a cardboard box in front of the Starbucks near our campus and ask all my students, come and put your book in the cardboard box. I can't get out of the car because of COVID, but I got all my books back. Luckily.
Good. I'm glad to hear that. Last week's show, after I put it on Facebook, we got a comment from somebody who'd been to Bougainville. So I wanted to mention that. And when you were talking about the COSAR, when they land it like this so they can see, it reminded me of the Route 66 Museum in the high desert, Mojave Desert in California. There's a Model T in there, and the man gave me a lesson on how to drive it, not for real, just pretend. And you have to constantly, work with the gear shifts, and you actually steer with your knees, the steering wheel, because if you do one thing wrong, it'll conk out and die. So that's what that reminded me of, because that's where my brain goes. And Zamperini was a badass. I don't think he's buried at Arlington National Cemetery, though, because we looked and looked and looked for him and couldn't find him.
Zamperini?
Yeah, Zamperini. But he was a naughty little boy, and he stole his neighbor's the percolator part so he could blow spit wads. I read his book, too. And that was all I had on notes, but I think we made it within our time. At least I hope we did. So, Lee, thank you. And once again, and next week we are going to be talking about, no, we won't be on next week. Is that right? No.
Next week's good.
Okay, yeah, I'm off here.
I have Saipan planned for you next week. And I will introduce you to some interesting characters on Saipan.
Awesome. And the last book, I'm going to end the show with just these fun little stories about World War II. So I'm a nerd, history nerd, guilty. Thank you, everybody, for watching. I hope you've been enjoying this mini-series with my brother Lee, and we'll be back next week. Same time, same place. Catch you next time.